Indeed is the summer week that at the end of June, the Baltimore Orioles could be in first place. So long, I would say, that this guy's been doing radio here for a better part of 2 decades now. We've had WNST since 1998. Rob Neyer, of course, longtime baseball writer at ESPN and a million other places. He is out on Twitter these days freelancing at Rob Neyer. That's Neyer. He is indeed the climber of climbs, the hiker of heights, and the writer of writings, and some of them are even political, but mainly baseball and sports. Rob, you're always wishing for that sort of unusual year where your team is just better than you thought it would be, and even when they're not very good, they're still good enough to win. This Oriole team's been walking on a tightrope, especially every time they hand the ball to a starting pitcher, and lo and behold, maybe the bats are bigger than the arms, at least at this point in the year.
That's right. I sort of didn't pick the Orioles to win the division. I don't remember where I had them in the standings, but what I did have before the season was a great deal of uncertainty, and the notion that the only team that would have really shocked me if they'd wound up winning was the Rays. I had them comfortably in last place, but the other 4 teams pretty close, and I still think that's basically right. But I'm hardly shocked by the Orioles doing well, and you look at the last 4 years. They won 93 games in 2012, 85 games, 96 games, 81 games. Maybe last year was the anomaly when they went 81 and 81, and not the previous seasons when they were super competitive.
Well, I mean, starting pitching's where it's at, and the one thing that they had during the good year, especially in 14, especially toward the end of the year, was every night someone took the ball and it became that sort of competitive, I'm going to top last night's effort, I'm going to get us to the 6th, I'm going to get us to the 7th inning. The Orioles have done a nice job of taking that Kansas City model of having a deeper bullpen and more arms on the backside, whether it's O'Day going down and Brock stepping in, and Britton stepping up, and even Givens has been okay, until he imploded last week. And now Dylan Bundy's coming on, a guy we've been talking about around here for it feels like forever, and he's finally actually getting the ball. But the starting pitching is where they spent the money in the off seasons, whether it was Jimenez the first time, whether it was Gallardo this time, while they let Cheng go, while they just threw Gonzalez summarily out the door before opening day. And then they've moved on from other guys in the trade world, Davies and obviously Arrieta, I don't need to tell you about, and Rodriguez. They really don't have a 6th or a 7th starter at this point, which is why Jimenez is going back out to the hill in San Diego on Tuesday.
It is sort of phenomenal that the Orioles have done as well as they've done in the standings, considering that they've got 3 starters, or have had 3 starters with ERAs above 6, or in Jimenez's case, almost 7.
And they haven't been replaced. It's one thing for those guys to stink and say, all right, we're going to bring the next guy. They don't have a next guy up at this point.
That's right, and that's got to be a little frightening. And I think the Red Sox are in the same boat. The Red Sox and the Orioles have both scored a ton of runs. I believe the Red Sox are first in the league in scoring, and the Orioles are second. But they can't find any reliable starting pitchers after their top 2 or 3. So it's a tough way to win. And I think you're probably onto something. It's not sustainable. So you look at the Red Sox and you think, well, they're going to go out and get a starter. And you look at the Orioles and you think probably the same thing. But there are only so many good starters out there to go around. At some point, you probably wind up losing if one of the guys who's pitching poorly doesn't turn things around.
Well, we've seen enough of the American League East here, Rob. Over the last month, we're about to go west now after a little dip in the toe with the Padres and the Texas Rangers last week. The thing about the Red Sox, the first time we saw them in the summer, not back in April when it was cold, but once everybody got settled in, it was the battle for first place. They both were sort of tied or a game up or a game back. And I looked down and the Red Sox were hitting .296 as a team. And I'm like, well, that's not sustainable either. You could sit here and say, well, you can't have bad starting pitching and make it hold up. You cannot hit .295 as a team for very long, although Bogarts and certainly Ortiz, even Pedroia, are holding up their end at this point. But you knew they were going to cool off at some point. The question for me is, where's the augmentation? And I know history, and you're the history major on baseball, would say, well, these championships and these divisions and wild card races are never really won on that big summer trade. That's a very rare thing. But I'm sitting here now saying, all right, who is going to help themselves? Because I don't think the Orioles are in any position from a farm system from a trade bait standpoint to really improve dramatically at all. These other teams, I think they have more up their sleeve to get a better pitcher, to get a bat if it's a bat that they need. Most of these teams need pitching at this point.
I think you're right. And the Red Sox are in a phenomenal position. They've got a lot of talent in the minor leagues. They can make a big deal. I think that they are, at this point, they're going to be somewhat reluctant to trade a bunch of their top prospects because they've struggled when it comes to signing free agents. Obviously, with Hanley Ramirez, and in particular Pablo Sandoval, I think they want to get back to, or at least stick to, their young players, since the young players are the ones who've gotten them to where they are right now. But they've got some grade B prospects they could trade too, and I think that they are dealing from a position of strength where some other teams probably aren't.
Rob Nair joining us here, longtime baseball writer based out in Portland, Oregon, and always taking a little time and talking some ball with us. Mark Trumbo having this sort of MVP-ish kind of year and really brought in as a Band-Aid in case the organization lost Chris Davis. And I think the organization really believed someone was going to give Chris Davis $180 or $200 million, which is why Angelos went nuts with that $150 million deal at the owners' meetings out in Nashville. And then, of course, that stuck, and no one went and got Chris Davis. Meanwhile, Trumbo was really kind of an afterthought and a $9 million rental for a guy that I think they thought would hit 220, would hit 26 home runs if you gave him enough at-bats, would strike out 212 times, and would at least be a poor man's Chris Davis. And as it's turned out, they not only signed him, and he's turned out to be the latter-day Nelson Cruz in a walk year, but Trumbo's had some big years in the past. I don't know that we could be shocked by this, but the question would be, what the hell happened after that big year in Anaheim a few years ago?
It is a good question. I mean, you look at 2014, which was his first year away from the Angels, and he was hurt a big chunk of the season. He played only 88 games that year, and that helps account for a lot of the drop in production. And then last year he was okay, but he wasn't what he'd been with the Angels. I think that part of it is just getting back and playing to the point where he can play every game where he's healthy. But you're right. This season, it's certainly to this point better than anything he did with the Angels. When he first came up, his first 3 seasons, he had a ton of home runs, averaged 30-plus per season. And I think that he's basically just gotten back to where he was 4 or 5 years ago. Does that mean he falls off a lot in the second half of this season? Not necessarily. I wouldn't be surprised if this wound up being his career year. I don't think he is a fundamentally different player than he was when he was healthy and playing at his best with the Angels. And I think we're just seeing what a guy who's probably roughly at his best, and then maybe having a little bit of extra luck too, he's got the highest batting average of his career. Even though the strikeouts are still high, the walks are still low, you tack on a few points in batting average, and it's amazing what can happen.
We knew this team was going to strike out a lot, Rob, and I don't know that may have scared us off 20 years ago. And hell, you could have written Moneyball, and I know you've read it and watched it, and watched it played out, out on the West Coast and getting on base, and the difference between hitting in the double plays and making contact versus striking out. No one is allergic to the strikeout these days, right? Like I used to play Little League, and if I struck out once a year, I wouldn't come out of the house all weekend out of shame. There really is no shame in striking out anymore, right?
No, there isn't. It's just part of the game, and a lot of people think that it's because the hitters aren't worried about strikeouts, and that's true to a point. But another reason for the strikeouts being so high is that the game has changed. Pitchers throw harder. The strike zone is effectively bigger than it's been in quite a while. That's just part of the game, and for all the Orioles strikeouts, and they certainly do strike out a lot, there are 4 teams in the American League that have struck out more than the Orioles. I mean, they're not middle of the pack, but they're not at the top of the list either. So their formula, at least when it comes to strikeouts, is certainly not something that's going to cost you in the long run.
Orioles on the top of the list in the only place that matters in the American League East standings, and headed west to take on the San Diego Padres. Rob Nair is our guest. You can follow his journey out on Twitter. Longtime baseball writer, scribe, and insider for many, many years. So, the divisions are stretched out right now, and I'm a little shocked that in June teams have been good enough to sort of run away from other teams, and the Orioles are one of those teams right now that's running away a bit from Boston and Toronto. Meanwhile, Cleveland can't lose. Texas has built a lead that looks, I don't want to say insurmountable because it's so early, but it doesn't look like any of those teams are going to come and get them, although it looks like Houston is an improved version. The Orioles will see Seattle later this week. And then out in the National League, the Cubs in San Francisco, it just feels like they're aligning starters for Game 1 at this point, right?
That's right. I mean, the Giants have played over their heads, no question. They have an amazing record in one-run games. Actually have a record that's roughly the same as the Cubs, who were obviously the class of the majors this season, all season, and I think still are. But the Giants' record in close games is just, again, phenomenal. And their lead over the Dodgers, I think it's not insurmountable. There are a number of divisions now where teams have 6, 7, 8 game leads, and every year one or two of those is going to go away by the end of the season. But most of the time they don't, and I'm a little surprised to say this. The Dodgers are now looking basically hoping for the wild card, but that's about what it's come to.
How about Johnny Cueto as a signing at this point, right? I mean, this is the time of the year we look back and say, well, I wish we would have signed him instead of Gallardo, right? Or wherever it is. But obviously, all this is situational. I mean, Cueto really wrecked himself by going to Kansas City for a little while, picking up a ring and not pitching very well. He wrecked his market, I would say. But clearly, it's been a market correction. He's been pretty good, and that's been the right place for him to sign.
Yeah, the Giants seem to have a magic touch with pitchers. It doesn't always happen that way, but it often has. And I think at some point you have to wonder if maybe they just know something other teams don't, whether it's which guys to sign or trade for, or what to do with them once they have them. I certainly didn't see Cueto coming. I mean, granted, in 2014 with the Reds, he was an all-star. He won 20 games. And he pitched well before that too. It wasn't like 2014 was out of the blue, but certainly to do what he's done with the Giants is pretty phenomenal. And you have to love their player evaluation, where they saw this guy and said, you know what, maybe he didn't look so great with the Royals for a couple of months, but we think he's worth $230 million.
Yeah, National League's almost a little bit boring. There's some races percolating at this point, but certainly the Nationals have had the roughest week in baseball, and the Strasburg, last month they're signing him, this month they're DLing him. I don't know that we should all be shocked about that for any pitcher, especially pitchers who've had some problems, but the Nationals are now teetering a little bit, and here come the Marlins, and here come the Mets, and I don't know that I've said here come the Marlins at any point in this century, right?
It's somewhat shocking, if only because Giancarlo Stanton has had such a lousy season by his standards. Before the season, there were people who were making a case for the Marlins, saying, look, they're not as good as the Nationals, they're not as good as the Mets, but this team could be interesting if Fernandez pitches as well as he has in the past, which, by the way, he has, even better, and Stanton does what he's done in the past, but Stanton hasn't done that. But they've been able to make it's yet another object lesson, and we get these all the time. Just look around baseball, and you can find them all over the place. How relatively unimportant one player can be. We always talk about, well, they need this guy to play well, or they need this guy to pitch well, and oftentimes it just isn't so.
Well, in the case of Stanton, you better hope he gets up and runs, right? I mean, from the investment they've made in him, and we sit around here every day and talk about, well, is it Manny Machado, or is it Bryce Harper, or is it Mike Trout, or will it be Correa or Bryant, or any of these young players? This is the dude that got the contract, right? I mean, this has to be an is, not a might be, or a guy teetering at the bottom of really productivity for them at this point.
Well, right. I mean, it's a 13-year deal. Which I
have to laugh out loud at that, Rob.
13 years is unprecedented. And at the time he signed it, not that long ago, it seemed like a team-friendly deal. And I think in the long term, maybe it is, but it always hinged upon Stanton staying healthy for at least a big chunk of that 13 years. And baseball is not football. Players' careers last longer. Their careers are fairly predictable, but bad things do happen to great players, and I think Stanton's numbers this season, the power has been there, the 14 home runs, but the batting average just hasn't, and that's, if he's not making contact, that's going to be a problem. You look at a guy hitting 220 at 26, well, if he's not healthy, what does he look like at 36 or 30? So, sure, it's an issue for the Marlins, but I really don't think that his contract or his performance is going to make or break this team. Other things could happen, and you look at teams. A lot of teams have had a lot of bad contracts over the years. I think about the Giants in particular, and they were able to get past them.
Well, the real story in Miami's been Ozuna, right? I mean, as far and also Ichiro, and I want to let you expound on the Ichiro thing because I haven't had you on since. Yeah, I said when Ichiro hit that, got the the magical hit 2 weeks ago. I said it's going to take Pete Rose 3, 2, 1 to urinate on, and it didn't even take that long. And of course, out in Cincinnati in a bad year, they're selling tickets and putting 14s all over the wall, and that seems like that and chili always seem to sell in Cincinnati. But for Ichiro, an incredibly magical career and sort of working in some relative anonymity right now down in Miami for a little while, right?
He is. I mean, he's basically a fourth outfielder, although a fourth outfielder is having a great season, and he's been a tremendous role player. Certainly, much better than I expected, given what he'd done the last couple of seasons. I frankly was surprised that the Marlins brought him back this season and thought it wasn't a good move. And I'm thrilled to be wrong. It's fun to see a 42-year-old ex-superstar hitting in 330 something at this point in the season. But you're right about Ozuna. I mean, this is a guy who looked so great a couple of years ago, and then last year got sent down, and people killed the Marlins for sending him down. But I don't know that he's playing well now because he was sent down. I think that's post facto analysis and doesn't really stand up. But you're right; he's having a tremendous season. He's been their best player, and looks like a future superstar. Well, he's playing like a superstar now, but a guy who could play in a lot of all-star games.
Worried about the Nationals in the East? I mean, it looked like it was them and everyone else, and the Mets certainly had their injury issues. That thing's tightened up. That might be the best race for the next 60 days because I don't think the Nationals have the ability to run away right now.
I would tend to agree with you. I think they played over their heads for a big chunk of the first part of the season, and of course they've now lost their best pitcher for some time. We don't know how long yet, but it's not a great club. Daniel Murphy, by the way, is having a Hall of Fame type year, and he's not that good. So we can almost guarantee he's going to fall off in the second half.
At least that's what the Mets thought.
That's right. But besides Murphy and Harper, they really haven't had anybody, and Wilson Ramos, unlikely enough. Ramos and Murphy are going to fall back in the second half. Harper probably not. He's not even having that great of a season at this moment. So it really for them, what it's come down to is a couple of guys having really unlikely seasons in the lineup, and then the starting pitching for the most part has been tremendous. And the most tremendous of them has been Strasburg, and now he's out for a while. So I think you're right. I think that this is going to tighten up. And I think the Mets are probably best positioned to fill that void if there is one. But you're right, the Marlins are in that mix too.
The great Rob Nair joining us here live via satellite from Portland, Oregon. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Rob Nair. That's Neyer. He is one of our defending champions here. All right, for the Orioles, getting back to the American League East, Rob, are you bought in? Are you bought in that they very well might be the best team in the American League East at this point?
Sure, they might be. But I think that here's a prediction: the Red Sox will be in first place again at some point during the season.
Wow.
And so will the Blue Jays.
Wow.
I think it's going to be, and I wouldn't count the Yankees out necessarily either. But I think it's most likely going to be those three teams, and I think they'll jockey back and forth the rest of the season. I don't see any reason to think any of those three teams is going to fall out of the race.
I don't want to say that playing 600 ball is not sustainable for them. I think it's not sustainable when every night they have a pitcher in trouble in the second or the third inning, right. And you're always looking over your shoulder for T.J. McFarland or whoever the flavor of the month in the long relief role is. I don't know how long they can go with Jimenez and Gallardo, but this is an interesting time. They've played so much at home, Rob. I mean, they're 31-13. They've already played 44 games at home. They're going to play the majority of the rest of the season now now on the road. They only played 31 games on the road. They're 12 under on that, and they're going to have to go do this out on the West Coast now. How the bottom of the rotation can just get them to the 5th or 6th inning and give them a chance to have some of these bats come to life later in the games. I mean, the Orioles have really teed off on other teams' bullpens. It's been those last 3 innings where they're capable of scoring 3 or 4 runs after the 6th inning. Not a lot of teams have that in them.
No, and nobody else has Manny Machado. I mean, when you look at the lineup, basically everybody except Flaherty, who hasn't even played that much, has been exceptional this season. I think the question is, can all those guys continue to hit? And for the most part, the hitters haven't been all that fluky. I mean, sure, you've got a guy here and there. Trumbo's been a little bit over his head.
Hey, they've done this where Jones and Davis really haven't had good years so far.
Right. But I think that the hitting's going to fall back some. And again, the question is, who's going to step up in the rotation, or who's just going to flat out pitch better, or will they go out and get somebody? And this is where management, they haven't had to do much this season because they've stuck with the starters, and the lineup has been incredibly healthy this season. I mean, aside from Caleb Joseph, where are the injuries? And the answer is there really haven't been any. That's a big thing that people underrate, how important it is to stay healthy. And to this point, the Orioles have been amazingly healthy, at least on the hitting side. Can they continue to do that? I don't know. We'll see. That's what makes these seasons fun.
Yeah, I mean, Hardy was out for a couple weeks, and really it wasn't the hitting that they lost. It was the defense and moving Machado around. A real difference maker. They had a lot of double play balls over the weekend, and that's always the pitcher's best friend. Rob Nyer joining us here. You working any baseball or just politics these days? What are you doing out there, man?
I am waiting to hear about a book proposal and working on a freelance piece for the New York Times and a few other things that I should be working harder at instead of enjoying this summer.
Well, enjoy the summer out there in Portland, Oregon. Hope to catch up with you soon. Orioles will be out on the West Coast keeping us awake nice and late out in Seattle this weekend. I know you'll be watching. Great having you on, Rob, as always.
Love doing it. Thanks for having me.
You got it. Rob Nyer. That's Neyer. And you can follow his journey out on Twitter. He is the writer of writings, the hiker of hikes, and the climber of climbs. And you can find him out there. He has a wonderful cartoon imagery out on his Twitter. So do I. I'm out on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Snapchat and Instagram and anywhere you are. You can always email me, nasty@WNST.net. The Buy a Toyota Audio Vault there for you 24 hours a day. Download podcasts, listen when you want, where you want, how you want. It's what we do in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault. Our morning newspaper hits your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. It is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And there's a Planet Fitness right around the corner from you. And there's a morning newspaper in your email inbox. All you have to do is sign up. Also, our text service keeps you abreast of all breaking news that happens first on your mobile device. It is all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Kolatzis will be here on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5. I will be here the week of July 11th, but it'll be me from 25 years ago, interviewing a variety of rock stars. I have gone through the litany of names from Daryl Hall and John Bon Jovi and Billy Joel and many deceased members, including Dan Fogelberg and Clarence Clemens and John Denver and Brad Delp. I have been pouring through and editing all the F-bombs and the S-bombs out. It is WNST Rock Week. That is the hashtag out on Twitter. I hope that you enjoy it. That is coming for you on July 11th, and it allows me to sit around and watch the All-Star Game from wherever I feel like it. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.